Hey everyone, it's Ankylosaur. I hope you're all doing well. For today's video, I decided I'd look at an archetype I enjoy very much in competitive Pauper EDH, and that's Voltron. It's a difficult style of deck to build, and it can be difficult to get wins with as well, but I think I have some ideas as to why that is. So, I wanted to discuss the archetype in general, how best to approach this style of deck, and then highlight a few decks that I think are perhaps a bit underplayed in the meta at the moment, because I think it's a viable strategy that has unfortunately not performed as well as it has the potential to in the past. So, with all that out of the way, let's talk some Voltron. First of all, what do we mean when we say Voltron? These are decks that tend to play one creature, turn it into a big threat, then protect it and ride it to victory. The Voltron part is a reference to all the pieces and parts that go into assembling the threat itself, usually equipment and auras, that grant permanent buffs to our creature. The upshot of this is, rather than focusing on how to attack with multiple smaller creatures, we have one big guy that deals a ton of damage and can take out our opponents in just one or two swings each. This is especially true if our threat is dealing commander damage, which is how most Voltron decks are built. For an example, let's take a brief look at one of my favorite Voltron decks, and one that I've had some tournament success with, and that's cedh Enchanter. I recorded a deck tech on this deck, which you can find elsewhere on my channel, but I wanted to mention it here because it's one of the few Voltron-esque decks that's had a couple top tournament finishes this past year, and it's a good introduction to the archetype. Here, our threat is cedh Enchanter. Not a particularly scary guy, being a 3-mana 2/2 with an ability that has nothing to do with combat, but we run a bunch of ways to buff him up past his mediocre starting stats. Being in green-white, we get access to some of the best auras in the format, including Ancestral Mask and All That Glitters, which quickly grows cedh into a creature large enough to take out players in just a single hit or two. Meanwhile, we have a number of ways to protect him from removal, including Vines of Vastwood, which can double as a pump spell, and Benevolent Blessing, which also allows him to sneak in damage past creatures of a certain color. cedh Enchanter is also a card advantage engine himself, which makes a big difference when choosing a Voltron commander. Part of the reason I think the strategy has struggled in the past is that many of the commanders best suited for the Voltron plan don't have reliable ways to get ahead on cards, instead hoping to aggro the table out quickly before the more controlling decks can grind into the late game. For instance, let's take a look at some of the red and/or white Voltron decks. Valduk, Kemba, and Brunner were all designed with this strategy in mind. They care about equipment and/or auras, and can not only crash in for large amounts of damage on their own, but also make tokens or pump up your other creatures as well, allowing you to spread out your attacks more than other Voltron decks might. The trouble with these decks in competitive Pauper EDH is that, generally speaking, the cards you draw are the only cards that you're gonna get. While the red decks might get to run a few impulse draw effects, like Reckless Impulse or Wren's Resolve, you don't have access to a ton of ways to turn one card into two or more. This means that, while you may get to do the Voltron thing and whack people with a giant Brunner or a bunch of elemental tokens a few times, any removal spell that you don't have protection for sets you super far back, and may take you out of the game entirely while you take a few turns to rebuild. Voltron decks tend to be very good at eliminating one opponent, and pretty good at eliminating a second, but closing the game on that third player, who has had all the time in the world to find their combo pieces, or to develop the right amount of board control or removal to hold off your one big creature, can prove to be a challenge. I think what this means in practice is that the Voltron decks that have the best chance of winning the pod must be able to either draw enough cards to keep finding the resources they need to protect their commander throughout a longer game, or they need to have some control elements all their own, to be able to counter win attempts while they're building up their big threat and close things out in the later turns of the game themselves. These are things that the Boros and Boros-adjacent Voltron decks struggle with. While they do get access to some burn spells that can kill a combo creature, or spells like Stave Off that can interfere with a win attempt, for the most part, they're hoping their damage output is enough to put them over the top, and unfortunately, it often isn't enough to take out the whole table in time. These three decks have a combined 1 win over 12 games in the CPDH.guide open play data, which is admittedly a small sample size, but it begins to indicate that maybe there's something missing from those particular decks. This isn't to say that the decks are bad, or that they can't win a game here or there in a CPDH pod, but I do think that they may be better suited to high-power casual tables, where there are fewer decks looking to either combo off before these decks get set up, or looking to control the board to the point where they can never stick their Voltron threat. But let me know in the comments if you disagree, or if you have a list for any of these three commanders that can hang with the top CPDH decks. I'm happy to be wrong about these sorts of things, and I'd love to see your deck lists. In any event, I do have some suggestions for Voltron commanders that are more viable in a competitive pod. These are decks that I've either played to some success myself, or ones that have the card advantage and control elements that, at least on paper, should allow them to outlast their opponents and close out the game. First, we have two hexproof commanders, in Nightveil Predator and Slippery Bogle. Hexproof goes a long way towards protecting our one big threat. Edicts still get us, and sweepers, if they deal enough damage, will too, but our commander will be safe from targeted removal as soon as we get it down. Nightveil Predator is a much more control-styled Voltron deck, with all of the counter magic and removal that Dimir is known for, but with its finisher in the command zone, rather than relying on a combo line, like the Peregrine Drake Flicker combo. There are plenty of auras in blue-black that one can run to pump up Nightveil Predator. Sinister Strength and Dark Favor give it +3/+1, which is both enough power to turn it into a 3-turn clock, and enough toughness to dodge pretty much all of the sweepers in the format that could hit it. And Eternal Thirst gives it a +1/+1 counter whenever an opposing creature dies, as well as Lifelink to help win the race against more aggressive decks. These are great to put on our flying hexproof commander to help us win the game, but it's really the third keyword, Death Touch, that makes it an exciting control finisher. Since we're in blue, we have access to a number of auras that turn Nightveil Predator into a pinger, as well as Viridian Longbow, allowing us to sort of build our own Visara the Dreadful and shoot down the table's most problematic threats turn after turn. Then, when the coast is clear, we can battle with our commander and end the game in just a few swings. While Nightveil Predator is our controlling Bogle-style deck, Slippery Bogle itself is more aggressive. Our Bogle can come down on turn 1 and start swinging as soon as we untap with it, with plenty of green's efficient auras to boost its damage output to respectable levels. I've highlighted two of our best early game plays here. A turn 2 Predatory Hunger can grow our commander to enormous size fairly quickly, while Favor of the Overbeing grants evasion, vigilance, and +2/+2 for only 2 mana. These are in addition to good old Rancor, Ancestral Mask, and so forth that you might be familiar with from Satyr Enchanter, or from Bogle decks in other formats. But Slippery Bogle gets to play with a tempo plan as well. Rather than being solely an aggro deck, we can run counterspells to protect against edicts or combo wins, as well as cards like Moment's Peace to swing a damage race back in our favor. I've also seen lists running cards like Murmuring Mystic to go along with the 30+ instants and sorceries in the deck, to flood the board with bird illusions for extra blockers while the Bogle goes to work. I will note that, over the dozen or so games I've played with Slippery Bogle, I've noticed that it does have the tendency to fall into the Voltron play pattern I described earlier, where it can take out 2 opponents fairly easily and then lose to the third. So proper threat assessment will be key to succeeding with this deck, as well as learning when to shift your attacks from one player to another, when to deploy your auras and when to hold up counter magic, and so forth. It's a difficult deck to play, but with the correct build and a savvy pilot, I think it has what it takes to compete at the top tables. Lastly, I wanted to break down my current favorite Voltron deck in the format, and that's Sailor's Bane. The Dragon Turtle is a 9-mana 7/7 with Ward 4. Not quite hexproof, but it does the job in a lot of cases. It also has a cost reduction ability. For each instant, sorcery, or card with an adventure you own in exile or in your graveyard, Sailor's Bane costs 1 less to cast. This means that our commander is frequently a 2-mana 7/7, which is nothing to scoff at, especially as we're often able to deploy it while still holding up counter magic or a bounce spell. advancing our game plan while ensuring that we rarely tap out and allow our opponents to win the game. In order to get to 7+ instants and sorceries in our graveyard, we have a number of cantrips and card selection spells that we can play in the early game, dinging us toward land drops or action at the same time that we make our commander easier to cast. Then, once we get it down, our Dragon Turtle is enormous. It's almost a 2-shot on its own, needing only 1 measly point of power to be able to hit for 8 twice and end someone's game. Thankfully, we have plenty of ways to pump it up, and almost all of them give some sort of evasion as well. As with Slippery Bogle, and most of the other Voltron decks in the format, Sailor's Bane is more difficult to play than it looks. Since we only have one real threat in the deck, and we're looking to close out the game with commander damage, figuring out who to attack when is of utmost importance. Every game I've won with Sailor's Bane has felt like one of the most difficult games of Magic I've ever played. Very rewarding, but there is no margin for error, and you really have to make every swing count, while ensuring that you won't get taken out on the backswing. But if you can make that happen, I do think it's one of the stronger Voltron-style decks that the format has to offer right now. I do have a couple other decks that I don't have as much experience with, but I wanted to mention before I close out the video. The first is Dargo Kelith, which may or may not be a traditional Voltron-style deck, but is built to drop Dargo as early as possible, and has a number of double strike spells that, in combination with a +1/+1 counter from Kelith, will turn him into a one-shot kill on anyone who doesn't block as early as turn 3. There aren't a ton of the usual Voltron-style cards, like auras or equipment in the deck, but Dargo doesn't really need them, especially in combination with Kelith giving him an extra power boost on attacks. The play pattern is similar enough to Voltron that I wanted to highlight it, in case you're looking for a hyper-aggressive take on the strategy, or a Boros deck in the Voltron vein that I do think has competitive chops. And the second deck is Wilson with Agent of the Shadow Thieves. Wilson is a perfect Voltron commander, as he has a ton of very relevant keywords, and Agent of the Shadow Thieves pumps him up each turn. I know Wilson sees some play in Pauper Dual Commander, and Agent of the Shadow Thieves was strong enough to get banned in that format, but the pairing seems underexplored in 4-player CPDH at the moment. If you have any experience with Wilson decks, let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts on him. So that's my overview on Voltron for CPDH. I think it's an archetype that has potential to be quite strong in the format, and I hope this video will give you some thoughts for brewing up a new deck. As always, if you have any thoughts on the video, or on decks that I might have missed, please let me know in the comments, and we can continue the discussion down there. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. Bye!